Welcome, beautiful Paris Saint-Germain family. In today's video, we'll be answering the question, what is going on at FC Barcelona? What's going on at FC Barcelona? A lot of Barca fans asked me for my thoughts, and I said a video is coming out tomorrow, debriefing the thoughts. Obviously, this was the first Barca game I missed of the season, Barcelona versus Sevilla. Sevilla beating Barca 4-1. But 2 goals coming towards the end, and Robert Lewandowski missed a penalty around maybe the 78th minute. And at the moment, Barca only 2 points behind Real Madrid. Madrid have had a good start, so it's not the worst scenario for FC Barcelona. Take a look at the Champions League. They won 1 game, Newcastle. That was a toughish game, and obviously got beaten by Paris Saint-Germain. But honestly, it's nothing embarrassing losing to PSG because it's the best team in the world and has beaten Bayern, Madrid, Inter, Arsenal, City, Spurs, Atletico. I mean, they've beaten all the teams here. So it's nothing embarrassing for Barca to join that group. The only embarrassing thing is obviously the people that thought Barca and PSG were on the same level. I said multiple times, at least last season, both teams are first and second. PSG first, Barca second. Barca firmly first, PSG firmly first, and Barca firmly second. But obviously, some Barca fans did not believe. They believed they were either same level or even better than Paris Saint-Germain. But now let's take and answer the question: what is going on at FC Barcelona? The first thing I want to talk about is obviously Hansi Flick, because I think he has been, how can I say, a figure. The scapegoat of recently FC Barcelona, losing obviously 2 games in a row. I think they've only lost 5 games in 2025 or 4 games, and 2 of them were just now. So a lot of question marks on Hansi Flick. There were already question marks about Hansi Flick second season, even though I halfly believe it, halfly don't. I mean, we've seen that kind of pattern. We've seen Antonio Conte being trashed in the European stage. We've seen Jose Mourinho in his 3rd season at Chelsea twice, I think, and at United once, Madrid once as well. But I don't really know that much about Flick and second season and all of that. I remember his second season at Bayern. Yes, he did lose in the Champions League quarterfinal, but that was the Paris Saint-Germain, and they were missing Robert Lewandowski, and we all remember how important he was for that Bayern team. And then they won the league. I think they won the cup as well, maybe. And then, obviously, I think he mutually terminated his contract. He had beef with the board. So I don't think the same similarities are here. A lot of people have also made similarities to Paris Saint-Germain last season. I even made a tweet about it. Just funnily enough, it sounds a bit like it. But I don't really think it's the same, because I don't think Paris Saint-Germain in Luis Enrique's first season played at the level of Hansi Flick's Barca in their first season. That can be down to a better squad. That can be down to, I mean, anything. I just feel they had a better season. And we're not seeing the drop-off that we saw from Paris Saint-Germain. I mean, Paris Saint-Germain struggled to beat Girona, lost to Arsenal, lost to Atletico Madrid, and drew to PSV. Barcelona got a good victory versus Newcastle. They haven't really been tested in La Liga, neither playing Atletico Madrid nor Real Madrid. So, I mean, I don't really care what's going on in the league. And then when you look at the Champions League, beating Newcastle, as I said, which is a good side, and I mean, I guess only losing 2-1 to PSG. Yes, PSG were missing a lot of players, but Barca were missing a lot of players too. And now it's coming at Flick, and a lot of it has to do with his football. And I made a video right before the previous international break discussing Hansi Flick, discussing his football, if Barca can actually reach the pinnacle of football, playing that football. One thing we can say about the second season thing is that teams, especially in La Liga, have learned how to play versus Hansi Flick's Bayern. We've seen many attackers copy the Harry Kane's thing, which is staying offside, the ball gets to the winger. We saw Izzy do that in the Vallecano game. We saw Gonçalo Ramos do that for his winner. We probably saw that versus Sevilla. I haven't seen the goals. I've only seen the Rashford goal. Pedri assist, huge goal. So I think teams are, how can I say, finding out how to play Flick. But I actually saw a press conference that was really interesting. And it was Pau Cubarsí. They asked Pau Cubarsí, I think, about the defense and the high line and what's his thoughts. And what Pau Cubarsí said is, that's not the problem. The problem is the pressing, which I completely understand, because this is something I did mention in my video that I made before, what's going on at Barca. And that was, for example, in the Vallecano game, when Easy and Pizzi and their attackers got all of those chances. It was because the midfielders of Vallecano were not pressed. When you don't press the midfielders, it's very easy for them to then have all the time in the world and make that pass in behind. We could potentially say that for PSG's winner versus Barca. You know, Kangeli, he's pressed really tightly by Kubarsi following him. But then Kangeli finds Vitinha, and Vitinha is not pressured at all. I know it's the last minute and everything, but that's the tactic that teams are using against Barca. Vitinha was not pressed. He had all the time in the world. Hakimi saw Vitinha. He had all the time in the world to start making his run, and then obviously that led to a goal. So I definitely think that teams are more aware how to play versus FC Barcelona. That's a really important thing for Luis Enrique, for example, at Paris Saint-Germain. Yes, we won the UCL. Yes, we're so good. Yes, we're so dominant. Yes, we're so talented. But he always wants to make us more unpredictable, especially when it comes to the big games. And I think Barca are a bit too predictable how you should play them offensively. I still think defensively it's very tough, somewhat playing against FC Barcelona. But offensively, I mean, it wasn't that hard last season, and it's getting even easier this season, you know, playing the football that you want to play against this FC Barcelona team. But as I mentioned, a lot of it has to do with the pressing, and that goes along with, you know, Flick calling out players in the team for ego. That makes sense. Why? Because if you're not pressing, I mean, it is indirectly egoistic or directly egoistic, because when you press, you do it for the team. You usually don't do it for yourself. You're not going to win the ball and score a goal from it. You usually do it for the team. But when you don't press, you're putting yourself above the team. And I think that's what Hansi Flick is coming out against. I actually saw that in the PSG Barca game, for example. Barca, who always have a high intensity press, Flick even decided to play Ferran Torres instead of Lewandowski for the press. And Barca didn't press us that well. We pressed them way better, especially in that second half. And I've seen many teams press Paris Saint-Germain. Even Atalanta, who we beat 4-0, in some moments pressed us tougher than Barca pressed us. So pressing has to be fixed at FC Barcelona, or you can't do the... If you're not going to do the pressing, you cannot be playing the high line. Those go two hand in hand. If you're going to have a high line and offside trap, you got to press high. I mean, one other example I can mention, Paris Saint-Germain versus Chelsea. They had so many counterattacks and openings against us because of our high line. But what was the problem? Our pressing. Our off-the-ball pressing is what cost us basically all the 3 goals, because all 3 goals were identical. So the players have to start pressing. And if they completely do not want to press, I guess Flick has to change his tactics. But obviously, the manager in this situation comes before the players, because the players should be pressing, first of all. Second of all, they were pressing last season. Then obviously, we come to the injury woes. Injury, FC Barcelona. Barcelona have had many injuries so far this season. Is there like a good picture? Barcelona injuries, Marc Bernal, Frenkie de Jong. How is there no good picture for Barca with injuries? Is that one? No. All right, let's take anyone. Let's take this one. Ferran Torres. There we go. So, Barcelona's also had many injuries, and we've seen, for example, at Paris Saint-Germain, we've had many injuries. But despite that, we're still first in the league, even though we've dropped 4 points, and we've won 2 out of 2 games in the UCL. But I think Barca potentially impacts it more because they have a worse squad depth. One big thing, obviously, with Barca that makes a lot of stuff tougher and harder is their economical problems. Barca have the money, but they cannot use the money because they have to pay back their 1.2 billion debt. So they can't have an extraordinary squad depth like Paris Saint-Germain. You know, when we're missing a certain player or someone, we can bring on an insane other kind of player. And then it's obviously the system. The system makes everyone else look better. But obviously injuries is a valuable excuse for Barca. Yamal has picked up his 2nd injury of the season. Rafinha's been injured. Lewandowski came back with an injury. Bernal's still trying to recover. Gavi out. Fermin Lopez out. Even a Juan Garcia injury. Then it's the uncertainty regarding the centre-backs as well. Is it Pau Kovacic, Araujo, Christensen, Eric Garcia? I just feel like Barca have not been able to open up chapter 2 after last season. And this usually happens in the beginning of the season, especially after a high intensity last season. You get these kinds of injuries. And during these moments, the most important thing is surviving. And I think that's somewhat what Barca have done it well enough. They're only 2 points behind Real Madrid. They've won 1 out of the 2 first two UCL games, and I think the next games are pretty easy apart from Chelsea FC. So in the future, let's say we're in February, we'll look back at this part, you can say that, yeah, you know what, Barca did well enough during this tough stage of the season, because I don't think this will continue for that much longer. For FC Barcelona, quality-wise, I do think they will improve, especially with players coming back. I recently read a report, Lamine Yamal, Fermin Lopez, and Rafinha will all be back for the Girona game straight after the international break, and then it's a big UCL game to showcase your talent and quality. But sometimes a humbling in the beginning of the season can be good. Yes, I'm making some comparisons to PSG, but I don't want to make them because they're not really the same. Paris Saint-Germain was suffering. We didn't have injuries in the beginning of the season. We're looking really good in the league, but in the UCL, I don't know. The pressure was too much or something. And that doesn't seem to be the problem for FC Barcelona. They can still play good football. I think against PSG, a lot of Barca fans called each other reactionary and overreacting after that defeat. But I still understand that. I mean, you want to see yourself as the best, and you lose against Paris Saint-Germain, who were missing a lot of injuries in that game. But now going back to FC Barcelona, what is going on now that we've gone through some topics, some subjects? What has to be done to be solved at FC Barcelona? I think one thing I would love for FC Barcelona fans to do is start to critique your players. Even last season when our players were underperforming and I was blaming Luis Enrique for majority of the, us underperforming, I still blamed the players. I still critiqued and we're honest about them. You can see Yamal have a mid-game at best, and you see Barca fans say, oh, he was probably our best player, who was man of the match. You got to be critiqueful of your player. You got to have a high standard. Many times I see Madrid fans say Barca fans have the lowest standard. And that's, somewhat true. They hype up the minimum. And it gets to a point where you're never criticizing the players. You're putting everything on the manager. And I don't like that. I don't think Flick should be scapegoated, especially when you look at the work he's done. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, Barca fans were pushing Flick to win Manager of the Year award because, he didn't spend $1 billion like Luis Enrique. So I think Flick deserves critique 100%. You're the manager of FC Barcelona, and when the team is not performing, you deserve that. I can understand his tactics, looking naive and so on, but when the pressing is so bad, when even Kobarsi, I think Pedri as well said that before the last international break, when he's calling out stars in the team, not doing their job collectively and having an ego. I mean, Pedri mentioned it, Flick mentioned it, other players have mentioned it. I think the Barca team at the moment isn't as united as it was last season. Last season, they were coming off that Xavi season where it was a mid-season, but they tried to do their best towards the end of the season when they faced off versus Barca, PSG in the Champions League and Madrid in El Clasico. Obviously lost both, so went into the next season with a little bit of hunger, knowing that they can do stuff. I mean, they reached the Champions League quarterfinal. That was the first time they did that in like 3 years. Rafinha finished off the season well. Yamal had a superb Euros. So they were coming in with hot steam to prove themselves. But it nearly feels like some of the Barca players feel what they did last season was enough. You have to prove yourself again. It was the same. I remember after the Champions League final, they asked Luis Enrique, how do you feel about Dembele Ballon d'Or 2025? And he said, it's good, but I want to see Dembele Ballon d'Or 2028. And that's what Barca fans and the players and everyone has to be looking forward to, is the continuity. It's not about having one good season. It's about staying at the top for a while. And I think that has been a little bit of the problem of Barca. They feel like they had a really great season and they don't need to prove themselves that much. Yeah, that comes to the star players. Obviously, you got the Ballon d'Or drama between Rafinha and Yamal. I know that Barca fans want to smack it down a little bit. But even PSG, we had a little bit of drama with Hakimi. Some people at PSG were not happy. It wasn't that big. But there definitely is a rift between Rafinha and Yamal. And Rafinha definitely sees his teammates in a different way. When everyone was asked about the Ballon d'Or, nobody mentioned Rafinha. Even Pedri himself mentioned himself above Rafinha. So I think he has a certain feeling. Then, for example, it comes to Robert Lewandowski. I said this last season, going into next season, I don't think Lewandowski will be as good as last season. That has been another thing. So I don't think there's one main problem why FC Barcelona are struggling in the beginning of the season. I think, once again, as many Problems in the world, it's many problems leading to one big problem, which is FC Barcelona underperforming. If we look at it team-wise, goalkeeper Juan Garcia has been a huge acquisition, obviously injured, so that hasn't helped the best, but he's been good. Kunde, I don't know what's been going on with Kunde. He came late, into the season. Garcia was starting the first 2 games. Then Kunde came in and hasn't looked at the form, he was last season, but I think that will come with time. And then centre-backs. Barca they don't even have a fixed centre-back duo. You go into a big game, you don't know who's going to start. That's instability. It's not stable. It's not stable. Then you go to the left-back position. Balde obviously been injured. You got Gerard Martin. Then you go into the midfield. I've mentioned this so many times. You got Pedri performing at this level. And then you got a bunch of bumps around him. Olmo needs to start performing at his level. De Jong, I don't know why Barca extend him. De Jong is the same story all over again. In big intensity games where you need your players to perform, De Jong always ghosts. We faced De Jong in 2021, in 2023, and in 2025, and he stunk it up in every single tie. But the best double pivot. So I think there's been so many question marks, and then obviously in the attack, Lewandowski coming back from an injury, Rafinha having an injury, and then Lamine Yamal being injured twice as well, and not performing at the level he should be performing. So when you look at the entire team, you've had injuries, you have uncertainties in the midfield, you have uncertainties in the centre-back position, the fullbacks being not the best form or injured, and then the attack, the same story goes again. So I think Barca have not been able to play at their level, to feel their best 11 and to get some motion. Sometimes you need like a couple of games of repetition, 2, 3, 4 games to play at that level, and they haven't been managed to do that. So I think we'll look back at the start of Barca this season in a different way. When a couple of weeks have gone, I think now between the end of this international break in October to the beginning of the international break in November is where teams will be proven. Most teams will play around 7 games in like a 20-day period, 25-day period. I think that will, give us a great sample size, of how great teams are. But I think Barca, they haven't been able to, go into their thing, which they did last season in the beginning of the season really well. They haven't been able to score a lot of goals. They haven't been able to play a lot of great football. It's also heavy individual reliance on a Pedri, on a Yamal, on a Rafinha. The system has to be tweaked a little bit and so on. But in my opinion, I think the players deserve you know what? It's less the players, less the manager. I just think the situation at the moment needs to be resolved. Players should be coming back. And I think after the international break in Girona, when all the players are back, it's going to look better. And as I said, Flick calling out players, players calling out Flick, the media talking about Flick, the media talking about players has been like a storm over the club. Which always will happen at a big club when it's underperforming. I remember at PSG when we were underperforming with the media said. I remember Madrid. We see the same thing with Liverpool as well. So we've seen multiple teams struggle to come into this season. I think, with the added team games in the Champions League last season, it's a lot of stuff that's happening in football at the moment. So to simply end this video, FC Barcelona are struggling from many problems. Opponents finding out a little bit how to play better versus FC Barcelona. Barca not pressing, the full team not being available, and weak squad depth being exposed. Some of the players not performing at their ability, even though they are available. So it's a bunch of problems that can't be answered really in one answer. But I've tried my best to put out all of my thoughts, what's going on at FC Barcelona, and I think the improvement will come. But I do want to mention that PSG feat definitely humbled the Barca team and could have been a huge factor in their performance and result versus Sevilla. When you lose a big game, especially against a team like PSG, Pedri, Laporta, so many players been calling out PSG, talking about PSG as, their rival. And then they got humbled. Because, yes, PSG only won by 2-1, 1-goal margin. But we saw what happened in that second half. I haven't seen Flick's side be completely dominated and molested as Flick's Barca looked like, especially in that second half versus PSG. So I think this is a humbling period for Barca. It's a humbling period for Barca fans. And you should always look positively at a humbling period because you usually come out better after it if you accept you've gotten humbled. There may be some arrogant people, arrogant fans, arrogant players that don't want to accept that, but it was a humbling. and you got to move on from it. PSG and Barca will probably face maybe in the knockout stages, and that would be a time for Barca to prove itself. But until then, Barca have to continue proving themselves. And that's, you know, the positive part of having a bad start, is that it feels that motivation and hunger that I think the Barca players were lacking in the beginning of the season. I mean, think about it. They went from Europa League, bad seasons and every trophyless, to domestic treble and reaching the Champions League semi-final. It was a really successful season for Barca, especially when you look at their recent seasons. But they have to understand, they got to do it again. And they got to do even better. I think most people at Barca won that UCL. I think most people are expecting a team that reached the semi, that lost, you know, a little bit, you could say, unfortunate to Inter. That team should be going to the final, or should be competing to win the Champions League again. Obviously, at the moment, it's not looking like that, but that's the expectations of this season. Last season, there weren't high expectations. You were coming off a trophyless season. You didn't really know what's going to happen in that season. And then we saw Rafinha's form, we saw Yamal, we saw Pedri, we saw Leva, we saw all those players performing at a really high level. That's what has to happen at Barca. The hunger needs to come back, the motivation and the unity to perform better after every single game. And that's the great thing with an international break. It's really a clean slate, so you can start over again. That's been it from my boy PSG, and hopefully guys have enjoyed this video. And as usual, allez Paris.